Welcome to a test between Gran Turismo Sports penalty system and Gran Turismo 6's penalty system. This test will be between GT Sports, practice for daily races, and GT6's time trials and seasonal events. Because in GT Sport, the only way to really solve penalties are direct footage of doing events live, not using a replay feature, or just straight up doing it live. And honestly, I don't think I'm quite talented enough to be able to time direct footage in a way to pause it exactly where I need to explain stuff and still show everything in a way that makes it the most accurate. So I'm going to have to do this completely live. And in GT6, there's no showing any of it because penalties are only involved in online stuff. And, well, GT6 doesn't have online anymore. But that's one of the reasons I'm making this video. Because despite how many people, including myself, have complained about GT Sports penalties, in some ways, GT6's penalties are actually worse. In some ways they aren't, but well, this is a comparison between them. This is just my opinion, because this is just my test, but I'll try to make this as accurate as I can via this test. I could do this in a race in GT Sport and then compare it to a race in GT6, but that requires me driving a race one-handed, and that's just going to be a lot of chaos that we don't necessarily need. So it's easier and still pretty much the same amount of accuracy to just do one car versions of events, which GT Sport is practice for daily races, GT6 is seasonal event time trials. So anyway, let's get into it. Again, I'll be driving this one-handed, so the camera might be shakier than usual, but it's pretty shaky anyway, and there's not that much I can do about it, so sorry. I always attempt to do my best to not have it shake, but that's not the easiest thing in the world to do. But let's get into it, folks. The first test will be me showing GT Sports and then describing GT6. Not every time I'll necessarily be showing the thing in GT Sports, but I will do my best every time to describe it, even for when I do show it. Anyway, let's get right into it. This is GT Sport. I go into this turn. That might not actually be a cut. That was a cut. Wait for the penalty to come up. Or not. Well then, apparently that means you can cheat in time trials now on 1.17. Great. That's actually something that I literally just found out. This is breaking news whenever I update this. I would hope, for Jiminy Cricket's sake, this is at least a penalty. Actually give the example, right? Jiminy Cricket, is it? Well then, GT Sport is extremely lenient with penalties in 1.17. This is not what this video is about, but it's definitely showing it. I'm not even sure if I can actually do this test now, because this test relied on giving a whatever second penalty it may be. GT Sport used to be pretty strict in penalties, but apparently in 1.17 you can now cheat. There we go, that's a penalty. I don't know how or why the other ones weren't, but anyway. Let's get into the actual example. Apparently you can now cheat in 1.17, but different video. That might be the object later. This penalty is 2.6 seconds. But in GT Sport standards, that means it's 3 seconds. I wouldn't honestly mind if everything in the 0.5 second barrier or higher was rounded up. If they do it for everyone, whatever, that's math. There's rounding or there's keeping what you have. I'd still overall prefer it to be to keep what you have, because that's just the most accurate. But no. It's not even just rounding. Because rounding involves rounding down as well. It's a straight up... I don't even really know a nice word to say about it. It's straight up cheating the player, I guess, is probably about the nicest way to put it. This doesn't really have as much of effect with the time of penalty that I got, but I'd say this penalty was 2.001 seconds. That would also still be a 3-second penalty. for whatever reason in GT Sport, PD either decides to not care about math or just plain don't know how math works. I'm gonna go with it's they don't care about math because, well, they programmed the game which requires math. But if it is they don't want to acknowledge math, then that's a straight up PD logic, which it probably is because I've discussed it in previous videos. But this is this video, and this is a comparison, so now compared to GT6. The way GT6 does penalties is either in a race, it does it by slowing down your car, there's no time penalties at all. But in terms of a time trial, which is direct comparison to this, it just straight up makes the lap not count. It doesn't actually add any time to the end of the lap, it just straight up doesn't make the lap count. This is what each of them do, but it's actually hard to compare that aspect of both of the games because it's just so different. If you finish a lap in GT Sport and you still have a penalty, the next lap doesn't count, but at least in GT Sport you actually can delete the penalty. This, in a way, makes GT Sport better than GT6. Because in GT6, no matter where you get the penalty, the next lap doesn't actually, or that lap actually doesn't count. I'll get into next lap in the next test, but in terms of that lap, and that lap only, there's no deleting a penalty away in 6. This being Branch Hats, so I'll use that example. Turn 1, Branch Hats, you get a penalty on GT Sport, you can delete that and carry on your merry way, that lap will count. In GT6, there's no deleting it, that lap just straight up doesn't count. On to the next test. This is about the next lap. To sum up those two for the first test, they're kind of both terrible. GT Sport doesn't understand what rounding is, and GT6 doesn't understand that turn 1 doesn't affect the next lap. Or that lap, and I'm too carried away with the next lap because that's actually kind of annoying in itself. Next test, this honestly won't be sewn well no matter if it gives a penalty or not. I'm pretty sure it won't, but I'll put my car in a situation in which I can explain it better. Oh no, I've lost control and spun out into this turn at Branch Hats, legitimately in all the ways that would happen in a race. Oh no. In GT Sport, this may or may not be a penalty. It probably isn't the way that I did it, but let's just say it is. In GT6, again, the lap is completely invalid because that's a penalty. But the next lap is actually not invalid. In GT Sport, if you were to finish the lap with the penalty still intact, the next lap is invalid. So in that sense, GT6 is better than GT Sport, because the penalty only affects the lap you're on until a certain point, which will be the next thing I saw, because this works to explain in both 6 and Sport simultaneously. Right there. Actually, right there, right when it hits start. In GT6, if you get a penalty beyond this point, it does affect the last lap, no matter what, because you can't delete a penalty. This makes GT6 worse than Sport, because it's an automatic next lap disqualification if you get a penalty beyond this point. That doesn't really work at a track like this, honestly. I mean, there's areas where, yes, it definitely should hurt the next lap, but if you were to go off track here, there's really no way it would help the next lap. Last turn, yeah, maybe. Here, no. GT6, no matter what it is, if it's beyond the point in which your car starts out, it doesn't cut the next lap no matter what. GT Sport, the only time it doesn't cut the next lap is if you carry a penalty to the line, no matter where you get the penalty at. It can be turn 1, it can be the last turn. Same thing. So there's that comparison completed. Beyond this, it's actually a little bit harder, so I'll attempt to drive it in a way to make it do stuff. And as y'all saw at the beginning of the video, apparently 1.17 was a lot more lax with penalties. I might do a video on that later, but I'm gonna attempt to do what I plan to actually do here, maybe. If it lets me, I don't know. Y'all might know where I'm going with this. Because in before 1.17, this was a surefire penalty. Is it not now? Oh, for Jiminy Crickets. I don't think... It's not even resetting you now. Before it actually even reset you when it did that and give you your penalty. This then, 1.17 is extremely lenient on penalties now. Take that as you may. Maybe future video. But let's just say this is a penalty for the sake of the test, because it kind of has to be. I assume there's still some instances in GT Sport where you just straight up hit a wall. Not a wall where I just hit a wall. This is the first test I'll explain. And it is a penalty. In some ways, that's legitimate. You can hit a wall and then slow yourself down to a corner, and then it's just less braking, and it makes time overall better. But in some ways like this, there's no way, shape, or form where it actually helps lap, but yet it's still a time penalty. In 6, again, the lap is invalidated, but it doesn't actually add any time to it. But this is where I get into comparison where they're kind of both terrible. Again, it kind of goes to, as I said in the beginning of the video, it's kind of hard to compare what happens when the lap ends in terms of validations and such, but this is something that happens during the actual lap with both games. There's some circumstances where you can straight up cheat the penalty system, and whatever penalty it gives you is still actually less than the time you gain by cheating. This only works in the GT6 standpoint in a race, though, so I'm not going to mention that too much, but y'all probably know what I'm talking about. An example being the reverse layout of Trial Mountain for GT6 and any layout of Tokyo Expressway with Fast Car and GT Sport. But on to the direct comparison. In GT Sport, I'll still use the Tokyo Expressway version. Because with Tokyo Expressway, let's say you're in a slow car around the central header loop, aka the one that I'm good at, the one with not the long straightaways. If you're in a slow car in that, and you take a turn full throttle and you just barely tap a wall, it would still probably be a penalty. It's probably not how it's supposed to be. But yet in GT Sport, you can wall ride and you get the same penalty with a fast car around a long turn, and both of which a lot of the times are actually the same penalty. But yet, in the first instance I said, it actually hurts your lap no matter what and the penalty's pointless. In the second instance I said, yeah, it gives you a penalty, but it's not actually enough to compensate for what you did in some circumstances, and y'all have seen replays of that in the top. There's one time actually in Central Outer Loop, the one that I'm good at, where I got beat by only one person in America doing that exact thing, and that made me a little bit annoyed. And y'all may know who that person is, but that's also a video that I've already made. Go watch that video. Y'all probably know what I'm talking about. Moving on to the GT6 aspect of it. It's not the easiest to compare tracks of Sport and 6 because they're just so different. But GT6, I guess a good example of this would be Daytona in a NASCAR. You can just barely tap a wall and then the lap is invalidated. Or you can wall ride at... I'm trying to think of the best track for 6. I guess the best track for 6 would be... I guess sorta kinda Circuit de la Sarthe, because you can kinda... On the chicane version, you can kinda just bounce off a wall in a really fast car instead of actually doing the chicane. In a slow car, you can make it without bouncing off a wall, but nonetheless in 6, you can actually do that. And in a race, sure, it gives you a penalty, but not the actual thing. That hurts for a race, but for a time trial, no matter what, it invalidates your lap. But still, it's harder to give an example for 6 and Sport with that because there's so many different tracks. The main point I'm making with this is, in some ways, they're both kind of bad. In some ways, they don't give enough penalty to compensate for the cutting the track or wall riding or whatever. In some ways, they give way too much of a penalty in a sense of there's no point of a penalty in the first place. As far as I can think of, that's all the main tests between 6 and Sport in terms of how to do penalties. To sum it up, they're both fine with some stuff. They're both bad at the majority. Generally, I will give games credit where credit is due. If it's a blatant cut, until 1.17, apparently. If it's a blatant cut, like I'm about to do here, and I hope this is a penalty. If it's a blatant cut like this, yes, that's a penalty this time. That's a penalty in both games, and rightfully so. But the majority of stuff, as I've already discussed, honestly, they could both be better. In some ways, they could be better in different ways. Probably better to say some aspects they could be better in different ways, but whatever. You don't get what I'm saying. But there's many ways in both in which they could definitely be improved. Again, the main reason I'm making this video is GT6 is gone and behind us, and PD barely did anything to fix that, if anything at all. And there's ways in which GT6, even to this day, and as this day is beyond GT6's run in terms of penalties, GT6 is still worse than Sport, and Sport is a relatively new game. For all the problems GT Sport has in penalties, in which I still believe are most definitely there and most definitely worth mentioning, at least PD is attempting to fix those. I made another video on that as well. But this is pretty much just to sum it up in a way in which actually compares it instead of just making my own opinion of it. And all this is more of my own opinion, but it's hard to actually debate in some ways actual facts. Which this is probably the best way nowadays, at least I can sell the actual facts. So I hope y'all enjoyed this. This was probably convoluted in some ways just because it is harder to sell stuff on the GT6 side. But I hope I did at least a good enough job in explaining it that y'all get what I mean. Because again, there's kind of no way to go back to it. So, good riddance to GT6 penalty system in many ways. Is that a good thing? Is that worth a yeehaw? Not right now, because GT Sports penalty system is still pretty big and bad. But at least PD is finally trying. They should have tried on GT6, the game that sold better. But at least shame on you for the first time around. It'd be shame on them if they didn't the second time around, but at least now they are. I ain't saying I ain't gonna do PD logic on something like this later, because at least in this test I've already kind of shown 1.17 has some weird penalty stuff. But at least they are trying to fix it, even if they fix it wrongly. And they didn't fix it with GT6 and a lot of stuff in general. Both penalty systems are still bad, though. So no, that's not worth a yeehaw yet. Maybe in the future, but still like partially so, because GT6 could have been a lot better. And now they took GT6 away from us. And now I have RAM withdrawal syndrome. And that's not worth a yeehaw at all. I need my RAM.